Am I exactly 1 minute late? Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming. Yes, Dana, I'm doing it. Everybody is jumping up my ass about starting the show on time. Um, so hi everybody. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the show. Glad you could be here. As usual, as always, actually, I will be answering questions that were submitted ahead of time by patrons and members. So if you have something for me in the live chat, please hold off on that until I get through the patron and member questions, and then I will be giving my full attention for the remainder of the show to the live chat. So, having said all that, let's turn to the questions that were submitted ahead of time by my wonderful patrons and channel members. And the first one of those comes. I just caught a glimpse of something in the live chat. Radical Bacon says, "Is that a Chicago T-shirt?" It is a CM Punk T-shirt, and yes, it is. It is the Chicago flag, or a riff on the Chicago flag, and the CM Punk crossed arms. So yeah, it is a CM Punk T-shirt, not just a Chicago T-shirt. And you're right, I have never been to Chicago. Anyway, you made a liar out of me. I said I was going to answer the pre-submitted questions first, and I saw something in the live chat, and I was like, "Wah." So okay, now first question pre-submitted from a patron or a member comes from David Colby, who says, "I have the hottest Star Trek take. Yes, hotter than Strange New Worlds being really fashy and right-wingy." Yeah, well, you know how I feel about that. Here it is. Star Trek shouldn't have aliens. The reason why Star Trek has aliens is so they can tell stories about humanity, but by taking human facets and just smooshing them into an alien species, we A, racialize problems that are cultural, B, lean into bioessentialist tropes, C, make our sci-fi out of fucking cardboard because every planet is a planet of hats, oh, and D, avoid the 1960s TV censors. But we're not in the 60s anymore. We can just tell stories about racism now, Gene. This was inspired by me reading the Vorkosagen series. Thank you so much for that phonetic pronunciation, by the way, which is just a string of absolute banger TOS episodes made vastly better by being in an all-human universe. The differences between planets aren't rooted in genetics. They're social and economic and political, and the actors will love it. No more sitting around for 12 hours in makeup. Well, so, I mean, I don't disagree with you, and I have critiqued Star Trek along these lines myself, where I have pointed out that I personally think it is more effective, not only more effective storytelling, but more effective delivery of the political messages if you can write the Star Trek episode so that it is obvious that the critique is being directed within instead of without. Because in addition to what the problems you point out about bioessentialization and basically essentializing all of the aliens and leading to all Vulcans are like this and all Klingons are like this, like there that leads to problems. But also it frames the critique as, oh, this is a problem with those people over there, right? Because it's never the Federation's problem. The Federation are always the enlightened ones, and it's always the backwards people on the alien planet who have the problem. So it's always, well, isn't it a shame that those people over there are so backwards or so misguided or whatever? Why can't they be as enlightened as we are, right? So that's a very safe, comforting position from which to launch critiques and to tell, allegory and social commentary and stuff. So I much prefer it when Star Trek writers, as they are doing more and more often in the more modern variations of the show, making it framing the critique within the story so that it's clear to the audience that this is something that we need to worry about. This is a problem with our society right here, not those people over there, not some imaginary thing. It's not like a thought experiment. It's like, no, this is our problem. We should be worried about this. So I think you can do that without getting rid of the aliens, but I do think your larger point is a sound one. And yeah, the actors, if there were no more aliens in Star Trek episode, just the actors would love it. No more sitting around for 12 hours in makeup. And, I wouldn't have to hear my fellow Star Trek nerds piss and moan about how, oh, there's too many humans on the show. Where are all the aliens? You know, because I really get tired of that. I've said before, I know I've said it in private conversations, and I've probably said it in on videos before. If they did like an episode of Star Trek or a Star Trek movie or whatever, where I mean, where there were aliens, but the aliens just looked just like humans, as they've done many times before for budgetary reasons. Like if they just did some of that, I would not care at all. I probably wouldn't even notice at first. I'd be like, halfway through the episode, oh, the aliens look like humans. Like, I do not care. I do not care. I am not here for the aliens. I'm here for the characters and the stories. If they happen to be aliens, great. But I, broadly speaking, do not give fuck one about the aliens. So, you know, I would be fine with that, except we're a little far along for it at this point. It would be a pretty radical rewrite of Star Trek to be like, by the way, there's no more aliens. But your essential point, I think I agree with. Speaking of Star Trek and points of divergence between me and a large portion of the fan base, Matt L says, have you started watching Lower Deck Season 3? If so, what do you think? I'm going to start it later, but I really liked Season 1 and 2. How do you feel Lower Decks compared to TAS? Would you prefer a more serious animated show? I prefer TAS. I don't think that the original Star Trek, the animated series, is a masterpiece by any means. I don't know if there are any great episodes. There are a couple of very good episodes, like Yesteryear, the Spock episode written by DC Fontana, I think is probably the best episode of the original Star Trek animated series. And there's a couple other ones too that are pretty good, but I don't think any of them are like, you know, must see masterpieces. Like, you haven't seen Star Trek until you've seen Star Trek the animated series. I don't think that highly of it, but I do enjoy it. But I prefer it to Lower Decks, because Lower Decks is a comedy show that almost never makes me laugh. So at least TAS isn't that. You know. And as for like, would I prefer a more serious animated show? I would prefer a comedic animated show that was actually funny. Now, that my problem with Lower Decks isn't like, well, I don't think it should be funny, it should be more serious. No, if they want to be funny, that's great. I think a comedic Star Trek show is a fine idea. I just don't think Lower Decks is funny. I have been watching season 3. We've had 2 episodes so far. I thought the first episode was a little better than the second episode, but neither one of them, I don't think I laughed once during either episode. The first episode did at least have one funny idea, which is that the site of Zephram Cochrane's first warp flight launch has been turned into a tacky tourist trap in the 24th century. That is a funny idea. Like the concept of historic Bozeman is a funny idea, but then it just sits there. Like, they don't do anything funny with it. It's a funny concept that they don't have any idea what to do with, other than which is a lot of the gags on Lower Decks, to be honest. It's like somebody came up with what could have potentially been a funny concept, and then they just kind of toss it out there, and they're like, there you go. What do you think? You know, there's no escalation, there's no exploration of the concept. It's just, or at least there's no funny exploration of the concept. So that's my major problem with Lower Decks. It just, like, I watched the most recent episode of She-Hulk, that one episode of She-Hulk made me laugh more times than probably every episode of Lower Decks combined ever has. So that's, you know, would I prefer a more serious? I would prefer an animated show that dramatic or comedic was successful at what it was trying to do, you know. So no, I'm watching it, but I'm not, you know, it's just kind of something to have on, you know, like, I'm not attached to it at all. I'm not invested in it remotely. It is what it is. Careless. Did Biden wait to work on student loan debt on purpose so the bump would be at the best time for November? I love how the White House was ready with figures on PPP loan forgiveness from those they knew would give them shit. Yeah, I think that was the idea. I certainly hope it was. I mean, one of the secondary upsetting things about the overturning of Roe v. Wade was how it seemed like the Democrats were just not prepared for it. They didn't have responses ready to go when the court struck down Roe, even though we all knew it was coming weeks and weeks ahead of time. It still seemed like they were caught flat-footed. But for this, for the student debt forgiveness, it seemed like they were ready to go. They had all their ducks in a row. They had done their homework, and they had their talking points ready to fire back at the Republicans who whined about it. And I think they've been doing a great job. So yes, I think they did calculate it to help them the best for the midterms. And I mean, good for them. That's what they should have done. Yeah. So I think it has been handled very well by the White House so far, and hopefully it pays dividends in November. Black Cover 95 and Ask Away number 109. I asked what Stuffy would be like as an Ensign's Log style Iconian. I want to revisit that idea. I imagine he'd be a lot like Mirror Spock. Similar core beliefs, but taken in a different direction. You suggested he'd use Iconian technology benevolently, but how would a dark version of him do it? Would he solely be improving his own society? Do Iconians even have social workers? If he were helping subjugated subjects, would his generosity be backhanded in a white man's burden sort of way? Might he try to be a velvet glove dictator, improving living conditions and shying away from brutality except as a last resort? Or would he find the culture intolerable and defect? Am I overthinking this? Well, if we're going, no, I mean, if you're going with mirror universe Stuffy, so it's Stuffy with the goatee, I think you can say that it would be like if we use Mirror Spock as our model, then it's similar personalities, sort of starting from a similar place, but twisted and inverted a little. So yeah, maybe if Stuffy's defining characteristic is his generosity, then we could say that his evil would be delivered in the guise of generosity. Like I like the idea of Stuffy being the velvet glove dictator, of doing things that are actually very harmful and authoritarian, but framing it as a very helpful, selfless, caring, giving thing to do. I can see Stuffy, the mirror universe version of Stuffy, being like the head of a 1984 Big Brother type government that puts a very happy face on everything it does. Remember, Stuffy loves you. Remember, Stuffy knows what's best for you. Stuffy will take care of you, but it's a extremely totalitarian deal. I think that would probably be close to like how a mirror universe Stuffy with access to when you say Ensign's Log style Iconian, you're talking about Spot. So if Stuffy were like Spot, basically, if a mirror universe version of Stuffy, so an evil Stuffy was like Spot, it would be. I think Velvet Glove Dictator is a good way to describe it. Okay, now I'm bending a personal rule here, and this is an exception to the rule, so nobody else get it into your head that you can do this. But General Contact Unit Problem Child mentioned in the last Ask Away that he had written, or he had come up with an idea for a Superman fanfic that I really liked, that had to do with Superman telling a fellow hero in the future about a time when he had to decide what to do when a fascist presidential candidate was rising to power. And Problem Child came up with an ending for his pitch of that story. So he submitted his ending to the Superman story, which I will read first. And then he also submitted a question. So here we go. First is the ending to the Superman story. Finding out retired Superman won't help them, the anti-fascist superheroes attempt to defeat fascist dictator not Trump themselves and stage a revolution. They get close to succeeding, but ultimately fail. At that moment, Superman shows up and says he'll murder not Trump and all his followers if he doesn't stand down and allow the revolutionaries to prevail. Not Trump, a coward, opts to choose survival over risking everything to retain power. He allows a democratic revolution in exchange for a comfortable imprisonment. Epilogue, Superman admits he was bluffing about the killings and has no idea what he'd have done if they called his bluff. He tells the young Antifa superhero who found him, if this happens again, you'll have to fix it. I fixed my mistakes, but next time I might not be able to. I can't ensure the consequences of my heroics will always be what I want without taking far more power than I should have. Then he flies into space, leaving Earth to solve its own problems. First of all, I like that a lot. I'm not sure about Superman leaving Earth, just for the simple reason that, just for my own personal taste, I just don't like Superman in space stories. Like, I prefer to keep Superman on Earth. And even if it's the end of the story and it's like, oh, Superman going off into space, to go live somewhere else to never return. Like, I don't like the idea of Superman being like a citizen of the galaxy. I like the idea of Superman being an Earthling and he stays on Earth. So, you know, he moves to the Fortress of Solitude and nobody else can get in because he's the only one strong enough to lift the giant key or whatever. Like, he takes steps to further isolate himself so that other heroes can't seek him out like this hero did. And removes himself even more from human affairs, but he doesn't actually fly into space. That's just a nitpick of mine because of my own bugaboo about being really bored by Superman and space type stuff. But other than that, I really like it. I think it's a really neat idea. Now the question: you'll understand why I'm doing this when you're grown up. Have you ever had the opposite experience? You were punished for something, accepted the adults were in the right to do it, then later realized they weren't? When I was in elementary school, the Blair government did this thing where every school kid in the country was supposed to simultaneously plant a tree to help the environment. I never got to plant a tree because early that day I was standing in line behind a girl waiting to hand in homework, and I started unthinkingly doodling on her uniform shirt because I was bored. When the teachers noticed what I'd done, I was kept inside. Later, my parents yelled at me. I assumed it was justified at the time, but now I think, God damn it, I was an autistic 8-year-old who had no idea how hard it is to get ink out of cotton. Could they not just let me plant a goddamn tree? P.S. I found an old pic of Rusty where he's cuddling his runt sister. So let me show you everybody the puppy pic. There's the puppy pic. There's Rusty and his little sister in the green circle. That is absolutely adorable. Thank you from all of us. Thank you for the puppy pic. I appreciate it, and I'm sure we all do too. And as for, I don't know. I can't think of an example from my own life right off like this, where it's a time when I was punished, and at the time I thought it was justified, but now I don't. I can't. I mean, I honestly can't think of anything. But that is really interesting because when you put it that way, it does make you think. Like, when you what is your purpose for punishing a child, right? Like, if a child does something like that, if a child scribbles on, a fellow student's shirt, I mean, not maliciously, just absent-mindedly or out of boredom or whatever. What is your purpose for punishing the child? What do you hope to accomplish by punishing the child? And will the punishment outweigh, will the negative effect of the punishment outweigh any possible positive benefit it could have? It reminds us to sort of think about these things. But no, I mean, I honestly can't think of an example from my life. But if anybody in the chat has any examples from their lives, I'm sure we'd all love to read them. But anyway, so yeah, thank you for the puppy pic. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the ending to the Superman story, which I thought was quite good. Thinking Cat. With the dip in numbers on HBO Warner Brothers and the management changes, as well as a similar move at Netflix with a drive to make more shows for everyone, which are less preachy politically and overly focused on relationships, something I'm kind of bored with, especially in sci-fi, how long till this starts affecting Paramount Plus? Also, do you think if Ronald D. Moore had his own Star Trek show, say the long-wanted Earth-Romulan War story, it might have a wider appeal, as Moore's Battlestar Galactica was extremely different to any sci-fi TV in that the people in the show were very hyper-realistic, something I find the 3 current Star Trek shows don't have the confidence to do, which is strange when you consider past Star Trek had the conflict element in characters like Gul Dukat. Well, but I mean, even Deep Space Nine, I don't think Deep Space Nine felt as realistic aesthetically and tonally as Battlestar Galactica did. Right? There's something about Battlestar Galactica, whether it was the way the way it was shot, the tone of the series, the seriousness of it, the lack of aliens in prosthetic makeup, right? I mean, it was I mean, it was, you know, it was a sci-fi action adventure series, so it's wrong to call it down to earth, but it was more down to earth and more plausible than Star Trek, you know, which is outright sci-fi fantasy. Um, so I mean, if you could do a Star Trek show that had a similar, very serious tone to his Battlestar Galactica, that would still be enjoyable to watch, you know, and would be compelling. I mean, I think it might work. Sure. I mean, Ronald D. Moore is a fantastic writer. He wrote great Star Trek. His Battlestar Galactica, from what I've seen of it, was very good. So, you know, I would have complete confidence in his ability to create a good Star Trek series. Whether it would be more like Battlestar Galactica or like something else, I don't know what he would do if Paramount Plus came to him and gave him a blank slate and said, do a Star Trek show, but make it whatever you want as long as it's a Star Trek show. I don't know that he would want to do Star Trek like Battlestar Galactica, or maybe he would. I have no idea. Um, and I mean, I personally have no interest in an Earth Romulan war story, but if Ronald D. Moore were writing it, I would certainly check it out. You know. Sangel says, "Hi, Steve. I hope all is well. I wanted to ask what kind of comedy you really like and tend to gravitate towards, and how would you classify the type of comedy you do on Steve and Stuffy / Stuffy and Friends? I don't consider myself to be a fun person or place a lot of importance in jokes and being funny, but I do believe everyone has a sense of humor. So I'm trying to nail down what I find funny and why. It's a bit hard because I don't laugh out loud for most jokes. I have mild enjoyment of most jokes and no response to others. I do like sarcasm a lot. Not sure what that says about me. Um, I would say my style of comedy as a writer, uh, and also in many cases the type that I gravitate towards as a viewer. It's very character based. It's things that are funny. It's not so much setup and punchline. It's more things that are funny in this particular instance because it involves these particular characters, right? The one of the joys of writing the Stuffy videos was and will be again at some point, uh, is that those characters got to a stage where I as the creator knew them so well, and they had been so well established by the episodes that I could write dialogue for them and put them into situations and have them interact with each other in ways where it would be funny because of the characters. You know, I could say, okay, I know what situation to put Jack in to have something funny happen, you know, or if I give this line to Stuffy and I know exactly how he'll say it, that will be funny. And it might not be funny if any other character said it, but it'll be funny because Stuffy will say it in this way at that time. So it's very character driven, which I like. Um, and I'm lucky that I like that because it's historically been the only kind of comedy I've ever been all that good at. And that's kind of what we do on the Ensign's log as well with me and Jason and Dana. It's really, I mean, it's also based on our chemistry with each other as performers, but also our characters, especially me and Jason, because our characters have been there the entire time. Um, and our relationship is more long established. There are things that we can do when we just bounce off of each other that it's funny when one of us does it, that it wouldn't necessarily be funny if it was any other character in that same spot. So I think that's a lot of my sense of humor as a creator and as an audience member. It's not so much, you know, like I've already said, I'm repeating myself. It's not so much setup and punchline. It's more character and situation based. Republicans' wet dream. I can understand your call for gun control. I, for the most part, agree. I think the thing that would be most effective would be getting rid of high capacity magazines. What would your solution be? Or would you rather many former soldiers become LEOs? Do you think their training to shoot the enemy versus less lethal methods have an impact on the rash of minority shootings of the last few years? Well, this is something we talked about in the patron hangout most recently. The difference between the training that soldiers receive and the training that a lot the far inferior training that a lot of cops receive before they're allowed to, start packing heat and hit the streets. I mean, that would not be my preferred solution. I mean, I think that might be an improvement if a military degree of firearms training and also training to de-escalate and to use force as a last resort. I mean, I think that would improve certain things with policing, but that would not be my preferred solution. As far as policing and specifically policing and the problems related to it, I would prefer things like redistributing the responsibilities of police departments to other government agencies that are better equipped to respond to situations where an armed police officer is not the best person to respond. I would rather work on things like disarming police, or having a situation where cops that are just out on patrol just to keep an eye on things, uh, are not armed with lethal weapons. Like if you need to call a cop to respond to a violent situation, then yes, they can show up with guns, but they're not just carrying them all the time as a matter of course. Things like that. But as for gun control, more broadly speaking, yeah, I mean, I think getting rid of high capacity magazines would help. I also think banning assault weapons would help. I think banning semi automatics would help. I think having a federally funded nationwide continuous buyback program to encourage people who have guns to give their guns up. I think that's a big one for me, because I think the biggest problem is that there are just so many guns extant in the population, and anything we can do to reduce the number of guns in people's hands is a good thing for me. So, uh, massive federally funded buyback program that just rolls on and on and on. Um, Getting rid of these ridiculous laws that require police departments to resell crime guns, that forbid police departments from destroying crime guns when they're no longer needed for evidence. I think it should be exactly the opposite. I think once a crime gun is no longer needed for evidence, I think you should be required to destroy it. It should be illegal to resell it, as opposed to how it is in a lot of states now, where it's illegal not to resell it. So I think things like that would be more effective than banning high capacity magazines. But yeah, getting rid of high capacity magazines would certainly help. It would certainly help with specifically the mass shooting problem. Agent Meister Pelderjoy, Steve, in my last message, I asked you about a bat event that I felt didn't get enough praise. This week, I'd like to get your take on one I felt gets way more praise than I feel it deserves. Hush has always been up there with Dark Knight Returns and Year One as one of the must-read Batman stories. But why? The writer is constantly trying to subvert expectations until I just didn't care anymore. This character is being manipulated by that villain, but it was really this guy who was behind the whole thing until he was killed off, but then he wasn't, because it was this guy all along. And then we have the lame-ass motivation of the main villain. He's out to get the son of the guy who saved his own father's life, resulting in the villain having to wait a few years longer for his inheritance. Is this the best they could come up with? Jim Lee's art is exquisite as always, but the same could be said for the dumpster fire that was All-Star Batman and Robin. Am I missing something here? No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think Hush is bad. To be honest, I haven't read it for many, many years. I read it monthly when it first came out. I was subscribing to the monthly Batman title when it was coming out. So I read Hush 1 month at a time when it was first being published, and then I read it again, I think maybe the following year when it came out in trade paperback. But I don't think I've read it since then. So my memory of it is not super sharp, but I remember liking it quite a bit, but I don't think it's comparable to Batman Year One or Dark Knight Returns or any number of other, like top shelf, legendary, absolutely must read Batman story. Like, I don't think it's as good as the stuff that Jeff Loeb did with Tim Sale. I mean, if I was going to recommend Batman stuff written by Jeff Loeb to people, I would go Long Halloween and Dark Victory and the Halloween specials from Legends of the Dark Knight way before I would say read Hush. I mean, even though I seem to have liked it more than you did, but no, I don't think it's like classic that every Batman fan has to read, but it's fine for what it is. I do think a lot of your criticisms of it are fair, you know, in terms of how the story is told and all the different twists and turns. I do think that's a little excessive. Um, and part of that I think is that it was pitched as an event series at the time. Like as it was coming out, it was like, oh, Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee are teaming up for a 12-part storyline in Batman. And it's like oh boy, it's a huge deal. So it was presented as like a big marquee event, you know, at the time. So I think part of that was, let's keep them interested. Let's keep them guessing. Let's take them for a ride, you know? And I think after a certain point, that doesn't do the story any favors. But yeah, I like Hush, but it's not, you know, must read Batman for me, even though I do think it's for the most part pretty good, quite good actually in a lot of ways. Some random geek who is someone who apparently spits in the face of Biden. Well, I have high standards. Oh, okay. It finally happened. After many things, including not coming in on Sundays to work overtime, my bosses told me to stop. I told Joanna I'm tapped out on Monday when she asked for $15 for food. Today, the 2nd, she finally gets her SSDI check, but until then, she had no money since Monday. A charge hit her checking account, leaving it at negative $84. Her son has food. She always makes sure he has food, but sometimes leaves her starving. Not good for one's health. Worse if you have 3 chronic illnesses. Joanna needs folks to give money each month, payday each week, actually. The $965 I gave her in August wasn't enough. Now, I do have realistic expectations about what the Dems can do and want to do, or what Wall Street, their donors, allows them to do. That means UBI isn't until 40 years from now. We're back to normal, Obama and Bill Clinton normal, which still sucks for poor people. Steve, am I wrong with this assessment? Or do we have to be happy with the crumbs we are getting? Well, I mean, I don't know if UBI is 40 years away or not. I have no way to predict that at all. And yeah, I mean, you're right that the status quo sucks for poor people. I mean, you're not wrong about that assessment. I think it would be worse for poor people with a Republican administration and a Republican-controlled Congress, but it still sucks for poor people regardless. And as far as do we have to be happy with the crumbs we're getting? Well, I don't think I would characterize them as crumbs, but whether you do or not, no, of course not. You should, of course, you don't have to be happy with them, and we shouldn't be happy with them. One of the points I made in the video that you reference in your name, where I said, you know, there's 2 ways of responding to it. You can be someone who spits in Joe Biden's face, or you can be someone who regards, and I was speaking specifically about the student debt plan. You can be someone who regards that as step 1 or whatever number step it is, but a step in an ongoing process. So don't just take the $10,000 or $20,000 of student debt relief and say, oh, problem solved. Thanks, Joe. Okay, good job, everybody. No, because clearly the problem still exists. So we need to do more. But instead of saying, thanks for nothing, Joe, because he didn't completely solve the problem, say, okay, this is good. This does help. And it does. It doesn't help everybody. And for some of the people that it does help, it doesn't help them enough. But it helps a lot of people. And there are a lot of people that it does help enough. It'll completely wipe out student debt for millions of people. That's a big deal. It's certainly not crumbs to them. It may come across as crumbs to people who have more student debt than can be wiped out by this plan. And that's understandable in their situation. But looking broadly across the effect it will have on the entire country, it's certainly not crumbs to the people who will have their student debt eliminated by this. But whatever effect it has on any given American, it should be viewed as a first step or a step, and with more steps to come. And we have to continue to push for those next steps. So while we're pushing for those next steps, I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a moment to acknowledge the good things that have been done, because I think that's good for us just psychologically and emotionally to still have hope, to say, oh, things can improve, things can get better. Each increment of improvement will not give us everything we want or even everything we need, but it is possible to make things better. And if we made things this much better this time, maybe we can make them this much better next time. And if we made things better in this area with student debt, then why can't we make them better in terms of, uh, raising disability benefits for people like Joanna, or any number of other programs that are meant to provide relief to people living in poverty through government aid. And once we do that, why can't we work on other more long-term sustainable ways of lifting people out of poverty so people don't have to rely on getting a check from the government every month, or maybe we have a system where more people get checks from the government every month, and that just becomes the floor that we build for people. Like whatever solution we're working towards, just because we don't get everything right now, and just because what we get right now doesn't help everybody, that doesn't mean that the response is, oh, that's not good enough, fuck you. The response, to me, the productive response, if we want to make things better for everybody, the productive response is, okay, this is a good start, or this is a good next step. Now let's keep moving for the step after this, and let's make the step after this even more than this. We're like, it's a process. And like I say in that video, I understand why people are frustrated. And I understand why Joanna and people in her situation are frustrated and are suffering and are in an incredibly difficult situation, because, the bills come every month. And you can't just say, well, be patient, be patient, be patient. It's an incremental process, right? I mean, that you can say that, and I do say that, but I don't expect it to make people in that situation feel any better, you know? Um, but none of that means that there's not progress being made, or that progress is impossible, or that it's a waste of time, or that, no good is being accomplished, or nothing is ever getting any better. Like, I reject all of that completely. But I do agree with you that, yes, things still suck for poor people in this country, and we need to do more in order to fix that. The question is, what's the best way to fix that? What is the most practical way to fix that? And I think that's another area where we probably have some disagreements. Michael Hadeline is back. First, a quick public service announcement to anyone hearing this. If you are 45 or older, please get a colonoscopy. I lost a dear friend to colon cancer this summer, and it sucks. Don't be next. Now for the question. With Zaslav determined to screw over DC shows and films, I got to thinking about how the original versions of Batman and Superman will become public domain in about 10 years. So, Steve, if you wanted to write a script for a big Batman-Superman movie based on their original 1939 versions, but made for a 2033 audience, what story would you pitch? Well, if we're going with the first Batman stories to go into the public domain, so stuff from like the first year or so of Batman's publication, I mean, I think I got to go with the villain's got to be Hugo Strange, because Hugo Strange came along in, I think the cover date, I looked this up earlier, so this isn't completely off the top of my head, but I looked, I think the cover date for the issue of Detective Comics that has the first appearance of Dr. Hugo Strange is February 1940. So it was probably on the streets late 1939. So I think I can get by with having Hugo Strange be in, among the first year of the first calendar year of Batman stories that would go that would be in the public domain first. So it would be a Hugo Strange story for sure, and maybe make Hugo Strange the villain of The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, which is the actual first Batman story ever published. So do an adaptation of The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, but with Hugo Strange as the bad guy instead of the just sort of random bad guy that was in that story. Something like that. And as for Superman, I mean, again, I think it would have to be an adaptation of stories from the first year of Action Comics. And I really enjoyed the storyline where I think it started in Action Comics #1 and it continued in Action Comics #2. This story that eventually led to it. Superman getting involved with an arms dealer and eventually led to Superman intervening in a war in a fictitious like South American country. You know, very activist Superman, which I think would be fun. So something like that. Not necessarily have like a marquee like supervillain type character, but Superman using his powers for social justice and fighting for equality and fighting for peace in the world, and stopping a corrupt arms dealer from intentionally stoking a war in another country to sell munitions, which ended up being the story in Action Comics #1 and 2. So that's where I would go with that, I think. Isaiah Taylor. So I'm also a Ken Burns fan. I like how he tries to, most of the time, present details of history in a non-biased light and sticks to facts, not melodrama. That being said, for my birthday, November 25th, or Christmas, I'm planning on buying the Ken Burns 1990 Civil War documentary. What topic would you want Ken Burns to tackle next? For me, I want him to do a miniseries on the Cold War. I want to hear accounts from communist officials in various countries to people who manned nuclear missile silos. I would like to know the human side of the conflict, not the nuclear war kills, the world cliche. Although I'm sure that would come up. Finally, what will be the final thoughts when said miniseries concludes? Yes, capitalism and American Western culture won the Cold War, but who were the real winners and losers? Russia is once again under the control of a czar wannabe, and capitalism in the Western world is failing. Climate change, wealth inequality, etc. Thoughts? Well, first of all, I think a Ken Burns Cold War documentary is a fantastic idea. I would love to see that. I love everything you just wrote there. If I could pitch my own, and I think you would appreciate this, Isaiah, because this is something else that we share in common, I would absolutely love a Ken Burns documentary about the space program. And if we want to limit it to the space program, like in the 60s, like the first sort of rush of the space program. So start with like Sputnik and take it up through the Apollo program. And because it's Ken Burns, we wouldn't stop with the first moon landing with Apollo 11. We would take it all the way to the end of the Apollo program, and maybe some commentary about, how that was sort of the beginning of the end. Even though it was our greatest triumph, it was the sort of zenith of the space program. And even though everybody hoped we would continue to rise from there and go on to even more astonishing things, it actually wound up being, well, we never quite got back to that point again. But I mean, can you imagine a Ken Burns documentary, like a 7, 8, 9 episode Ken Burns documentary that starts with the launch of Sputnik, then goes through the Mercury program and Gemini and Apollo, and paralleling all of that with the Russian space program and the Gagarin's flight and the Vostok program? That would just be, the why the Russian attempts to have a manned moon mission didn't actually work out. Like, yeah, the 1960s space program by Ken Burns I think would be fantastic. So that's my pitch, but I really love your Cold War idea too. Yeah. Huge Ken Burns fan. Stephen G. Clenard. Hey, Steve, I recently read that the island nation of New Zealand is considering changing its bullshit colonial name to the beautiful and poetic Maori name Aotearoa. Aotearoa. That is beautiful. Assuming I'm pronouncing that even remotely correctly, that is a beautiful name. Aotearoa. Land of the Long White Cloud. A famous ski resort in California finally ditched its racist and misogynistic name for the not particularly beautiful, yet delightfully inoffensive Palisades Tahoe. The erstwhile Mount McKinley is now officially known by its native name, Denali, thanks Obama. Are there any place names that you would like to see changed, either as an act of decolonization or just for shits and giggles? I, for one, would like to rename Bakersfield, California to Nutsack Funk, California. I think a certain Jason Harding might appreciate that too. He and I were talking on the phone a few weeks ago, and he did not have terribly kind things to say about Bakersfield. So I think Jason might appreciate that too. I can't think of anything specific. I know actually when I read this question first, when I was preparing the notes for the show, I did look up like offensive place names. And there are still to this day, a lot of them have been changed, in recent years with dawning sort of cultural awareness and changing standards and stuff and, growing sensitivity to these things. Um, but there are still a lot of locations of mountains and geological features, etc., that are named like Negro something or squaw something, like a lot of at best offensive or insensitive racial names that refer to black people or Native Americans or something like that. So there's a lot of like Negro Mountain and Squaw Mountain stuff still like spread out all over the country. So I would love to see all of those renamed. Can we do something about that? That would be great. But I don't think there's anything around here that I know of. There was actually, I think there might have been, for some reason, I faintly recall a somewhat controversial story that was local to me maybe 10, 12 years ago. And I think it was a local mountain that was one of the ones called Negro Mountain. It was called Negro Mountain. And it was changed to something more, acceptable. But I can't think of any at the moment. I do have a concept for a future Stuffy video that is related to this, but I will say no more because I mean that's not even that's just an idea that I have in, sort of packed away. That's not even going to be in whenever the next series of Stuffy videos happens. That episode is not even going to be in that bunch. That's like for somewhere in the far off future. But I do have an idea for a Stuffy video that deals with this kind of situation. But I in real life, I can't think of any at the moment. Matt Lore. Hi, Steve. Happy Friday to you. We finished celebrating Pride here in Ottawa last weekend and had a wonderful time. Do you have any romance dramas or other media to recommend, especially LGBTQ? I would like to give a shout out to the manga series Bloom Into You, which portrays lesbian, demisexual, and aromantic relationships. Anyway, thanks and take care. Well, unfortunately, I have absolutely no recommendations in this area, either romance in general or specifically LGBTQ romance. I am completely useless as far as that kind of recommendation goes. But if anybody watching in the chat has any suggestions, please throw them out there. And hopefully Matt will see this and we'll get some good ideas from that. But for me personally, I got nothing. I got nothing. Siamac, who, what? I got shit going on here. Greetings, Steve. I hope you're well. I'm going to go in a different direction with my question this time around. No politics, no Star Trek. I know. The past week or so, I've seen this meme going around about how the only reason we as a society elevate summer above the other seasons because for the first 18 years of our lives, we got those 2 to 3 months off. And now it is ingrained. As I was hoofing it from the subway to work and feeling the sweat pool on my lower back while the sun baked me from above and reflected off the concrete, I think I agree. Autumn is probably my favorite season. September in Boston, where I grew up, is beautiful. October in Philly, similarly so. What's your favorite season? And thoughts on summer? Putting aside the fact that climate change will kill us all. Okay, a little politics. I like summer. I don't like it when it gets super hot. And like speaking of climate change, the last few years have seen summer get uncomfortably hot a lot more often, and for a much longer period of time. It used to be that summer, when I was a kid, summer would only get like super, super hot if you started having days where it would be like so hot that you would want to stay inside just because of the heat. Those days would be like late July, early August, the dog days of August, right? I mean, June and early July, like you would never have weather, or you would very rarely have weather where you would be limited in what you wanted to do because of the heat. Whereas now it's become like the last few years, it's practically all summer is, upper 80s into the 90s, just constantly. I'm not a big fan of that. My favorite season is spring. I love autumn too. Autumn is beautiful. I'm looking forward to the leaves changing. I was talking to someone about that today. Looking forward to the leaves changing. But I think my favorite is spring. The season of renewal, the because first of all, it comes right after my least favorite season, which is winter. So winter is over. It's starting to warm up. The snow has melted. The trees are turning green again. The animals are back. It's not it's not super hot yet, although again that interval seems to be shrinking. Um, and baseball comes back, and there's just I'm a big fan of spring, but fall is also uh, right up there for sure. Next question, God help me. It's from John Burns. Hi, John. Thanks a lot. Hey, Steve, hydrate. I enjoyed playing Admiral Twitface this past weekend in Las Vegas. Thanks for your support. You must have not seen my post with my photo on Facebook. No, I saw it. You tagged me in it. I saw it. I guess I forgot to like it, but I did see it. Anyway, I remember the line, "Will crack my knuckles and jump for joy. Got a clean bill of health from Dr. McCoy." Do you? And this leads to my question. Is the problem for people not work, but the location of the work? If you get a job in an urban area, is the problem the urbanism? Farm work is work, right? And many times it includes room and board, so food and shelter are included. No issues with groceries and rent, yay, no landlords. But in the urban setting, shit, rent, food. Plus, if you're super poor, you can save up money. Maybe the problems of humanity is urbanism. Plus, what's the three most important things about buying a place to live? Location, location, location. Thoughts? I don't know if there are enough farm jobs as you are describing them to solve, poverty and unemployment and such. Because what you're describing is a pretty sweet deal. I mean, yes, farm work, agricultural work is extremely hard, extremely demanding work. But I don't know if there are enough farm jobs that include room and board to satisfy all of the issues that we would need satisfied. You know what I'm saying? I mean, one way to handle it would be just to work out some kind of a system where people who have jobs in urban areas are also provided with food and shelter just gratis, where it's not something they have to work for or spend money for. How about everybody just gets food and shelter? How about we just add that to the baseline? And then it doesn't matter if you're working on a farm out in the country, or you're working someplace in the city, or someplace in between. You've got your food and shelter taken care of. It's just something that is provided for everybody, regardless of where they work or whether or not they work. That could be a way to handle it too. But yeah, sure. I mean, or we could create a whole hell of a lot more farms. So there's a farm job with included room and board for everybody. I will say this: it is an outside of the box suggestion for solving the problem. Dataport Doll, who totally didn't forget to submit a question at the last possible minute. Evening, Steve. I have mixed feelings on the fact that Lens Flare Trek lost yet another director. On the one hand, I think the cast is incredibly talented, and I wouldn't mind seeing some genuine attempts at good storytelling from the Star Trek branch of the family. On the other, with so much new Trek out in TV form and genuinely good stuff coming from Strange New Worlds, do we really need the Kelvinverse anymore? After all, the whole point was to reboot Trek, and that's happened. I will always be grateful to the Kelvinverse for doing that, but sometimes the universe just wants to tell you to let it die. Admittedly, I feel the same way about Picard. Lots of fans were happy to know Worf is coming back, but I just thought, isn't it cruel to pull them off that happy farm they were living on upstate? Do you have any thoughts on when it's the right time to let a particular series in Trek go, or when it's okay to drag it on for 30 years, as with TOS? Well, as for the Kelvinverse, I mean, look, I really like the Kelvin movies. I like the cast. I have liked all three films so far, and I especially liked the last one, Star Trek Beyond. I felt like that was the one where they really got it right. So on the one hand, if that does turn out to be the last one, at least they went out on a high note. But on the other hand, it's like, oh man, they were just getting in the groove, and then it was the last one, you know? So yeah, I mean, Paramount still seems determined to do another one, even though they have now lost 2 directors in a row for it. It feels like it's kind of snake bit, at least as far as directors are concerned. So hopefully they find somebody else, and that person, is able to actually direct the film and we get a completed movie at some point, because I do like the Kelvinverse. I mean, do we need it? No, not really. But at the same time, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a Star Trek movie series running at the same time as you have Star Trek TV series running. Like, I feel like that's viable and that's fine. And I don't think a new Star Trek movie every, 2, 3, or 4 years is going to overload the fan base all that much. So I don't think there's any problem as far as that goes with a Kelvinverse film, as long as it's good. Um, but as for the other half of the question, I mean, look, the as much as I like some of the TNG movies, and I mean, I think First Contact is terrific. I think Insurrection is extremely underrated. Um, but the right time to say goodbye to TNG was all good things. Like that last episode was perfect. At least the right time artistically to say goodbye to TNG was all good things. Was the last episode of the TV series. That was a perfect ending. If you're thinking just in terms of creativity and looking at it as a work of art, that's it. That's it. It's done. You don't come back to it. You don't do movies. You don't do a TV revival with the same actors 30 years later. It's done. It's finished. It's complete. It's as good as it's going to get, right? So the time to stop TNG was back then. And I mean, like I always say, story comes first. If you have an idea for a fantastic story that involves bringing back characters and actors from a 25 or 30-year-old TV show, and it's going to be good enough to justify that, then yeah, absolutely do it. But as a rule, I mean, look, everything's got to end sometime. Like, it's not as though if TNG had ended with the last episode of the TV show and we had not gotten the movies, that would have been fine. Like, First Contact was a great movie. Insurrection was a better movie than a lot of people give it credit for. But neither one of those movies is so incredibly great and life-changing that I would feel, like the world was an emptier place without it, right? We would just be two pretty good Star Trek movies short, which would be unfortunate, but would not be the end of the world. And even if they had done the 4 movies that they did, but, Nemesis was the last one, and Nemesis was a pile of shit. But if they had just ended it there and they had not done the Picard series and not brought some of the characters back, that would have been fine too. Like, we would not have been cheated. TNG got 7 years of television and 4 movies. That's a hell of a run. It's not like if Picard didn't come along, we would have been deprived of anything. It's not like if they didn't decide to go full whole hog fan service with season 3 of Picard and bring back all of the TNG characters to join Jean-Luc in one last final adventure, right? It's not as though we would have been deprived of anything, right? TNG has been over for a very long time. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. So, I mean, the right time to let a particular series go is when the series is over. And one of the problems, even though I have enjoyed a lot of the new Star Trek stuff, I have enjoyed a lot of it. One of the problems with the franchise has become, especially with Picard, and to a lesser extent with Lower Decks, not because they're literally bringing back characters from old shows as the central characters of the show, but just because it just exists to do fan service callbacks. Like, that's all it does. One of the problems with Star Trek has become that it cannot let anything go. And I feel like creatively, at a certain point, if you have an ongoing franchise, eventually you have to just let go of what people did 20, 30 years ago and do new stuff. It can't run on nostalgia perpetually. Eventually, the old stuff that you're being nostalgic about is going to run out, and you will not have made any new stuff that will be worth being nostalgic about in 30 years, right? So, I feel like it's best to just look, the series is over, let it go. Like people say, oh, they should bring back Deep Space. Don't you want them to bring back Deep Space Nine? Don't you want a Deep Space Nine revival? Not really. I mean, I'll watch it if they do it, and I would hope that it would be good, but it's nothing I'm remotely clamoring for. That show's over. And I love it. It's great. It's my favorite Star Trek show. But it's over. And I'm content with it to be over. It's finished. It's done. You know? So, yeah. I don't know. That's what I think. Dana, happy Friday, Steve. I'm always interested in tales of wee small Steve, as Monday is Labor Day here in these gold-earned United States. I thought it might be fitting to explore the history of what led Steve Shives, the wee small fellow, to become Steve Shives, professional YouTuber extraordinaire. So what are some of the films, that made you realize that you wanted to do something like that? And why did they make you think that? Well, the thing is, when I was wee small Steve, there really wasn't anything because I didn't think about it. I didn't get the idea that I might want to be a writer, much less, make movies or something, until I was at least like 12 or 13. So I wasn't wee small Steve anymore. I mean, there are movies that I saw when I was that age that I eventually sort of came back to and were inspiring to me. Like I was very young the first time I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like I was way too young to even remotely try to understand what it was about. But I remember seeing it on TV and just being hooked by it, and feeling like, ooh, this is like a really good movie, this is a film. So that would be one, but I mean, I didn't think about it at the time. And honestly, in terms of me as like a writer and as like things that I watched that made me think, ooh, I might want to do that or do some version of that. A lot of it wasn't, even though I'm definitely a movie nerd and I love movies. A lot of it was TV. Like a lot of it was The Twilight Zone, because when you watch The Twilight Zone, the star of The Twilight Zone is Rod Serling, and not him on screen necessarily, but him as a writer. And of course, he didn't write every single episode. There were brilliant writers on The Twilight Zone other than Rod Serling. There was Charles Beaumont, who wrote a ton of episodes. And oh God, I just blanked on his name. The guy who wrote I Am Legend. I can't think of his name. I'm gonna have to look it up. Richard Matheson. I got it. I didn't have to look it up. Richard Matheson. But as far as the being a writer, things like The Twilight Zone inspired me just as much, if not more, than movies did. And then when I got into being a teenager, it was movies like, I loved Paul Thomas Anderson movies like Boogie Nights and Magnolia. Again, very writerly movies. I liked Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino. Again, a very writerly movie. So, movies like that were very character driven and had interesting dialogue and seemed impressive from a writer's viewpoint really grabbed me and made me think, oh, I wish I could do that. Or maybe someday I would like to do that. So, but as little wee small Steve, I mean, not a whole lot, not a whole lot. Jacob Monroe says, hello, Steve. What is going on with AEW right now? Will you be watching All Out? If so, what do you hope to see? I will not be watching All Out. All Out will be the first AEW pay-per-view that I am not going to watch. I am not going to buy it. I'm not going to watch it. The one exception might be, if I remember, actually it doesn't, even if I don't remember, I can catch it later because it'll be on YouTube. But during the pre-show, one of the matches they've announced for the pre-show is Eddie Kingston versus Tomohiro Ishii. And I would like to see that match because I think those two would have a great match. And I'm going to make every effort to see that match either live or at some point after the fact, because I think that'll be a good one. Although I must point out, no build up to that match whatsoever, which is one of the problems with the show and one of the reasons why I'm not going to watch, why I'm not buying the show. It's Ishii versus Kingston. It's a completely cold match. It's something they just threw on the show because wrestling nerds like me would want to see it just because we know Eddie Kingston and we know Ishii and we're like, oh, they'll have a hell of a match. So, okay. on the main show, the show that they expect you to pay $50 for, the only match the only two matches that I'm really interested in seeing are Danielson versus Jericho, which I'm sure will be very good, and the main event of Punk versus Moxley. But I don't want to see Punk. I don't want to see Jericho versus Danielson bad enough to pay $50 to see it. And Mox versus Punk, again, I'm sure will be a terrific match. And Punk's go home promo on Wednesday was fantastic. But the storytelling of that, the setup, the buildup of that match has been so like bafflingly bad that I just like if their end goal was to get to Punk versus Mox at the pay-per-view all along, why did they do Punk versus Mox on free TV last week? You know? And if they wanted to tell the story so that, you know, Punk versus Mox would be, well, they have their first match and Moxley wins like in shockingly easy fashion, and then they do the rematch where it's more of an even match where Punk comes back and he's ready. Why do you have to do that now? Why do you have to rush through it in 2 weeks? Like, I understand Punk was injured and he wasn't ready to go until recently. So why not do the quickie surprise ending match where Mox kicks his ass in 5 minutes on the pay-per-view on Sunday, and then have Punk be injured again and go away for a few weeks and then come back and build up to the rematch sometime later, you know, for a big TV show where they want to pop a rating then with the rematch, or for the next pay-per-view in November, usually when they have the next one, you know, Full Gear in November. Why not do it that way? Because the story they're telling is potentially a good story, but they cram it all into like a week and a half. So fuck that. Like it's just, you know, something like that needs time to build and to breathe and to create suspense and anticipation. And they're just rushing through it. So I have a problem with that. There are so many matches on the show other than those two that just feel thrown on the card for no reason. I don't give a single shit about this trios championship tournament. I think the idea of having a trios championship is a good idea, especially for AEW, where so many of the guys are in factions. But the tournament has not held my interest remote. I don't give a shit about the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega and Adam Cole thing. And again, that seems like that was just thrown in at the last minute too, because they added Cole to the match. Like, again, like this week, that wasn't even part of he wasn't even in the tournament. They just threw him in there. It's like, haha, surprise, you know, so even if I was interested in that story, which I'm not, that feels rushed and last minute too. So it's a terribly built up booked show. A lot of matches that just seem thrown on there that I have no reason to give a shit about. The women's division, once again, has been treated terribly. I mean, I love Jade Cargill and I really like Athena, and they're having a match that I wish I was more excited about. But, you know, it's been so erratically built. The 4-way for the interim women's title, like they throw Hikaru Shida back into that after she's been off TV for months. I love Hikaru Shida. I think she's been my favorite women's champion, my favorite women's world champion in AEW by far since the company started. I thought she was terrific as champion. She hasn't been on TV for months. Where's she been? She's just been gone. And then they bring her back out of nowhere. And they're like, hey, she's going to be in the 4-way to choose a new champion. Okay, would have been nice if we could have seen her on TV a few times leading up to that. So anyway, I know I'm not going to watch it. Joe McClory, the price of gas, inflation, and other things that are clearly outside of the control of just one person. These sorts of things are often the vector of attack for conservatives, and I used to assume that they use them because that is all they had. But sometimes I wonder if it's more than that. This view that the president or whoever is in charge is of an organization is the only one who decides things, it seems to fit in with their ever-growing desire for more and more authority being put in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And the only freedom they ever seem to care about is the freedom to suppress other people. Do you think there's anything to this, or do you think that they only think of the actual flaws of Dems are not actually bad, so they can only be mad at things they don't control? Actually, I think a lot of it just comes down to messaging. You know, they look at things that they think people will be upset about, like inflation and rising prices and things like that, and they identify a scapegoat. And in this case, they try to pin it on one specific person. And in this case, because there is a Democrat president, they can pin it on Joe Biden and say it's his fault. You think things are too expensive? You think gas is too expensive? You think inflation is out of control? You think the economy is not doing as well as it should be? It's Joe Biden's fault. Focus your anger on him and vote against him and his people. See, I think a lot of it is about messaging. I mean, I agree with you that they do seem to want to invest more and more authority in fewer and fewer hands. Like, that's definitely true. But I don't know if that is, I don't think that's consciously why they are choosing these particular lines of attack. I think it's just Republicans are better at Democrats at simple, clear messaging. And they have the advantage of they don't give a shit whether it's accurate or not. Like, they'll give people something or someone to be mad about, and they don't care if it's true. They don't give a shit that Biden, I almost said, they don't give a shit that Biden can't control gas prices. They don't give a fuck. He's in charge. So if the gas prices are too high in people's minds, then he's who's to blame. Period. They don't give a shit if that's true or not. It's an effective message. And I think that's why they do that. More so than, so it's not necessarily that I think you're reading too much into it, or that I think there's nothing to it, but I think mostly it's just a messaging thing. And last question from Matthew Datcher. It feels like some of the GOP are increasingly saying the quiet part out loud. For example, the student loan forgiveness will make it more difficult to recruit for the armed forces. Do Republican voters hear these messages? How, in your experience, can they continue voting for such conservatives? They either don't hear those messages, or they pretend they don't hear those messages, or they are forced to admit that, yes, they did hear those messages and they don't care. That is the thought process for most conservatives that I have seen or known personally in my life who continue to vote Republican despite stuff exactly like that. Because you're right, they are saying the quiet part loud. And yeah, that tweet from that Republican guy who was like, well, you know, what about if people aren't forced to turn to the military because they have no other solution to have a career or get out of debt or escape poverty, well, then how's the military going to recruit? Doesn't make their military look very good, does it? Doesn't really seem like we have a strong military if we're saying recruitment is based on exploiting desperate, impoverished people who just need a way out. That doesn't seem very good. It doesn't seem very flattering. It doesn't seem very healthy in any way. And you would think that, you know, people, whether they're liberal or conservative or what, they would have a problem with that. But most conservatives, I don't think they will be bothered by that whatsoever, because either they just won't hear it because they only pay attention to, you know, Fox News and such, or they will hear it and they'll take whatever spin on it that the Republicans want. They'll say, yeah, it weakens the military. Like, that's all they would care about as far as that goes. They don't give a fuck about how the military recruits people. They'll see it as the military is offering opportunities to people, and now they're just going to have their debts paid off, and they won't join the military and help the country by, you know, joining the military. They won't do anything good. They'll just have their debts erased, and then they'll go off and do something else that won't help anybody, right? And it'll weaken the military. And that's terrible, right? They'll process it that way. And the stuff they can't do that to, like I said, they'll pretend they didn't hear it, or they'll say, yeah, I heard that. And they don't give a shit. They don't care. They don't care. So that's what I think. That's the main explanation for that in my mind. So that's it for the patron and member questions. Thanks everybody, as always, who is a patron or a channel member, for submitting those. And now let me turn my attention for the last, let's say, 45 minutes of the show to those of you in the live chat. Let's see what we got going on here. There we go. Um, Dana says, I think Mirror Stuffy sounds like Spot on Ensign's log. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, uh, see, Spot is very sort of superficially happy, you know what I mean? And like uh chipper. But I don't know if he's necessarily iron fist and velvet glove. You know what I mean? I think Stuffy would be more like, pitching it as I love you, I'm taking care of you. You know what I mean? You're my friends, you're my children. It would be more softer than Spot would be, I think. Super chat from John Burns, coming soon, Star Trek Voyager, The Wrath of Kim. Well, I mean, he is the one with the beef, right? If anybody on that ship, he's the one who should be the most pissed off. Kane20C says, I finally finished American Monsters and How to Destroy Them. I was savoring it. New podcast recommendation? Not really. But I'm glad you listened to American Monsters. I was very happy to be able to guest on one or two of those with Jason. I thought that was a wonderful show. Daryl Letts, Bull Run or Manassas. I always called it Bull Run. What about you? Yes, I have always called it the Battle of Bull Run. I think Bull Run is the northern name for it. I think Southerners call it the Battle of Manassas, or the Battle of First Manassas and the Battle of Second Manassas, as opposed to the First and the Second Battle of Bull Run. I've always called it Bull Run myself. Oh, Dana, geez, that's stiff. Geek, they are arguing with you, aren't they, buddy? 255AD with a super chat, thank you, says, does being self-aware of my personality issues make it worse that I've not fixed them? Someone told me it's intensely frustrating that I can describe my problematic behaviors but still do them anyway. Well, speaking as someone who is not close enough to you to be impacted by those problematic behaviors, so I'm kind of speaking from a place of privilege as far as that goes. I would rather have someone who is aware of their problems than someone who is not. Because at least if you are aware of your problems, there is more of a potential for you to fix them. Whereas if you are completely oblivious to them or in denial of them, I feel like that's an even worse situation as far as correcting them. So if you're at least aware, I mean, I can understand why it would be frustrating if someone says, you can articulate what you're doing wrong so clearly, but you still do the wrong thing. Like, I understand why that would be frustrating. But I would rather that than have you be completely oblivious to it. But that's just my opinion as someone who is completely removed from the situation. Joe McClory. Oh my God, this is a good question. Best single episode antagonist in Trek. Well, if Gul Madred from Chain of Command counts, then it's him. I mean, technically he was in 2 episodes because he comes in at the very end of part 1 of Chain of Command. But Chain of Command part 2 is really the only episode where he's like there as a major presence in the story. So I would vote for Gul Madred. I think he's the best one-off villain from a Star Trek episode. Although, again, it's something, if anybody has any other suggestions in the chat, throw them up because I would love to hear what other people think. Stephen Schmaling says, hey, Steve, what's the deal with ragging on me to make an Orville vid? Ain't that your job? I was ragging on a lot of people. It wasn't just you. I was ragging on a lot of people. But yeah, it's my job. It's my job. And yeah, I mean, obviously that was a gag and that was fun to do. And it was fun. I like writing stuff where I can pretend to be pissed off, especially pretend to be pissed off at my viewers and my fans who literally give me my life. It's fun to play like resentment toward you folks because it's like, I would not be doing this if it weren't for you. So I can't be that mad at you. Some random geek says, I'm kind of imagining Iconian Stuffy as being like Ducat or Khan sans narcissism, tyrannical but genuinely trying to improve his subjects' lives. Better me than someone else. I can kind of see that. Yeah. Like, it's better for me to take that power than for another person to take that power. I can see Stuffy being like that for sure. Ooh, True Yellow Dart. This is a good idea. Steve, you should do a video on the similarities between political campaigning and pro wrestling tropes. That's got some potential. I may write that down and see if I can come up with anything for that. Oh, the Purple King. Thank you very much for this. Oh, hey, only found this channel relatively recently. I appreciate that you're one of the Star Trek fans whose political views doesn't completely contradict with its message. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for jumping aboard. Empire Jeff, would you rather be a stormtrooper in the Star Wars universe or a red shirt in the Star Trek universe? I'd rather be a red shirt because the ships in Star Trek are way nicer than the ships in Star Wars. Opinionville, there's Jason. What's the deal with Jason? All the shows are late. Get that a-hole in line. You have to understand, everybody, Jason had to go to Shreveport this week. And I haven't talked to him, except for right now, since then. So I assume it was a nightmare. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was nice. But anyway, Jason had to go out. Not only did he have to go out of town, he had to go out of town halfway across the country to Shreveport, Louisiana, which I don't think is the town that anybody goes to Louisiana to visit. So cut him some slack. Okay? Also, with the new episode of the Ensign's Log, that may or may not be a little late, that was due to technical issues during our last recording session that were 100% Jason's fault. So, let me see. 255 AD, how do you feel about Superman resolving a problem by threatening to kill someone? Does that go too far, even if it's a bluff? I think it would be fine if you handle it just right. I think if you set up the situation that it is that desperate of a situation, and then you write the aftermath so that it's clear that he was bluffing and it's clear that he would not have gone through with it and actually killed the guy, I think you can get away with it. But you're right. I mean, you have to be careful because you could write it in such a way that it doesn't work at all. Like, it would have to be written just right. But I think you have the right idea there. Hector David Hernandez Carrillo. Funnily enough, I entered your channel today to look if you had uploaded a review of the new season of Lower Decks, knowing your stance now about it. What do you think of Prodigy? I think Prodigy is terrific. I think Prodigy is excellent. And I'm far more anxious to see new episodes of Prodigy than I have been about new episodes of Lower Decks. I couldn't care less if they do any more Lower Decks, but Prodigy has been terrific. And I am eager for them to resume releasing new episodes of that, because I have enjoyed that quite a bit. Prodigy has been the really wonderful surprise for me of all of the new Trek shows so far. It's not my favorite of the new Trek shows, but it was the one that I was the least interested in going in. It was the one that I expected to enjoy the least, before I ever watched it, because it's a kid's show. Like, I'm a 42-year-old man with no kids. So when they said animated show aimed at kids, I was like, well, that's probably not going to be for me. But I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And one of the episodes of it, Time Amok, is one of the best episodes of any of the new Star Trek shows so far. I wrote a video that I don't know exactly when I'm going to put it up. It might be not this coming week, but maybe the week after next. I'm not promising anything, but I wrote a video about my top 10 list for all of the new Star Trek shows. So basically top 10 episodes of every new Star Trek show, starting with Discovery, and top 10 taken from all of them. It's not like top 10 best Discovery episodes, top 10 best Picard episodes. It's a top 10 drawn from all of the episodes made in the current era. And that episode of Prodigy, Time Amok, is very high on that list. I really thought that was a good episode. No, Geek, I wouldn't hate you because of your question. If I haven't tried to kill you by now, I think we're good. Siamak, I have to admit that I was a little sad Spot broke bad again. Not a surprise, but oh, I missed Spot. Yeah, well, I mean, that's how my character feels. It's like, oh, Spock is such a good dog. He's evil. Like, I think I don't want to speak for Jason necessarily, but I think one of the things about Spot that makes him a funny character and also an interesting character is like he is cute and there is a likableness to him, and you can kind of see where Steve is coming from, but also you can't because Spot is evil. Like, Spot murders people. Spot is a cruel mass murderer on an unfathomable scale. Like, he is irredeemable, but he's still so cute and he's still so funny and you just like him so much. Like, that's what makes Spot such a great character. Radical Bacon says, hey, Steve, so I'm taking Harvard's CS50X this semester to continue my education, and I've started a flame war in the class Discord by asserting the code is political. What do? Win the flame war. Win the flame war. Steve Schmaling says, wanted to thank you for the imposter syndrome vid. Please see my comment on the vid for full appreciation. Also, my name being Steve as well. Felt attacked. I'm glad you liked the imposter syndrome video. I thought that one came out pretty well too. Joe McClory, best color commentator in wrestling and baseball. I don't know of any commentators that do both wrestling and baseball. I honestly, it's been so long since I watched an entire baseball game. I don't even know where to begin as far as like best color guy, best analyst on baseball. But as far as wrestling, best color commentator in wrestling right now, currently today, Taz. Yeah, Taz easily. I think if the announce team for AEW was Tony Schiavone on play-by-play and Taz on color commentary, I think it would be a 100% improvement of the quality of the announcing. Or even if it was Excalibur and Taz, because Excalibur and Taz are really good on the YouTube show that they do, which I don't watch very often. I don't have time to watch it very often, but when I do get to catch it, Excalibur and Taz are terrific together. But either Schiavone and Taz or Excalibur and Taz would be a terrific color commentary team. And Taz as the color commentator would be terrific. He's always good. I need to see Michael Haneline's question, Dana. Jesus. Oh, that's a good question. Have you ever listened to or read Superman Smashes the Klan? If so, how would you feel about it being made into a movie? Well, I mean, I've listened to the original radio show that it was based on, which was not called Superman Smashes the Klan. It was named after the hate group in it, the Klan of the Fiery Cross. I've listened to that. And yes, I have read Superman Smashes the Klan. In fact, it will be the subject of an upcoming Best Superman Ever video, probably coming out toward the end of the month. I haven't written it yet, but I've decided that will be the next subject of Best Superman Ever. And just the way my production schedule is looking, it won't be until the end of this month probably. But I also recorded a conversation with Dana about Superman Smashes the Klan, because Dana just read it very recently and absolutely loved it. So we had a conversation about it that we've already recorded that will be going up as a video on Dana's channel at the same time as my video goes up on this channel. So that's coming probably later this month. But yes, I really enjoyed Superman Smashes the Klan. I thought it was one of the best new Superman stories in many, many years. Tasby12 says, I love it when you go off on Zack Snyder. Can you spend a minute or two doing that? And by the way, people mentioning like Harry Carey and Vin Scully. First of all, unfortunately, they're both dead. I thought it was more like who's the best color commentator now, not who's the best color commentator ever. And if that was the question in wrestling, the best color commentator ever was Jesse Ventura. and second place would probably be Bobby Heenan. But anyway, Vin Scully and Harry Carey were not color commentators. They were lead announcers. They were calling the play-by-play. I don't think of them as color commentators. But anyway, okay. So Zack Snyder makes loud, obnoxious movies, has a hard-on for fascist imagery, although supposedly he's not a fascist. I've heard people say that he has an axe collection hanging on the wall of his office at the studio, at Warner Brothers Studios. Seems like a huge douchebag. Seems like the kind of douchebag that wears like one of those watches with like a leather gauntlet around it. You just see he's a douchebag. He's just a fucking douchebag. And he makes douchebag movies. He makes movies for 14-year-old white male douchebags who think that everything should be quote unquote awesome and loud and obnoxious and full of explosions and fights that make no sense, and wants everything needs to look like a fucking fight scene in a fucking video game. And he sucks. He sucks ass. He makes shitty movies for shitty people who like shitty movies. And he's done very little to disown the incredibly toxic fan base that has rallied behind him, and elevated him to a place in film culture and a prominence in film culture that he does not deserve. None of his DC Comics movies were remotely good. If you want to choose a single person to blame for what a mess DC Comics' movies franchise has been over the last 10 years or so, that one person is Zack Snyder, because he directed a bunch of really, really shitty movies based on DC Comics characters. And for a time, DC was all in with the Zack Snyder thing, and it just didn't work because the movies blew. So there you go. Yeah, geek. Yeah, yes, I will give credit where credit is due. Zack Snyder's adaptation of Watchmen is better than it has any right to be. I mean, especially judging by his later output. It's like, oh shit, how the fuck did he do? And even Watchmen is not perfect. And there's a lot of Zack Snyder-ish stuff in Watchmen that definitely pulls it down. But it is my one line review of Watchmen is it is greater than the sum of its parts. You know, I watch Watchmen and the theatrical cut, by the way, not the director's cut. The extended director's cut of Watchmen is fucking dog shit, which I don't think speaks well to Zack Snyder's instincts as a storyteller. The theatrical cut is excellent. And you get to the end of that and you think, you know, it wasn't perfect. It had its problems, but goddamn, that was way better than I thought it would be, or way better than it had any right to be. So, yeah. 255 AD says, so J.K. Rowling apparently decided to write a novel about someone whose abuse online for being transphobic. Does that show it's not always wise to write what you know? Yeah, actually, I read a review of that, I think by Nathan Robinson on Current Affair earlier today, a review of the new Robert Galbraith novel. And his take was similar to that. You know, it's maybe write what you know isn't always such a good idea, but his specifically, he said, you know, it just reminds you of how important it is for writers to have editors. Like there needed to be an editor who read this manuscript and said, okay, we're not publishing this. Like, this needs a lot of work, you know, and apparently that didn't happen. John Burns with a super chat, thank you very much, says, D&D party in an icy outpost. I'm interested. A dog runs into the outpost chased by orcs. You've got my attention. Party doesn't know Orcish. They kill the orcs and take the dog as a pet. Go on. No one's seen the thing. I hope you feel that was a good way to spend $20, John. I am a fan of the thing. Steve Schmeling says, was always curious, what music do you listen to? I mean, a lot of stuff across the board. I don't listen to any one particular kind. I mean, a lot of what's been in my playlist lately has been like pop and rock and alternative from like the 90s, from when I was a kid, and the early 2000s. But I mean, I also love blues music from pretty much any era, like even going back into like the 20s and 30s and like Lead Belly and Robert Johnson and stuff like that. I think it's that is some remarkable music. Um, I love country music, especially stuff like from the 50s and 60s and 70s, like Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson, and then the generation before them, like Hank Williams. I think Hank Williams Sr. is the best pop songwriter who has ever lived, and it's not close. Like I don't even know who second place would be, but first place is definitely Hank Williams. Um, so I mean, it's a broad spectrum of stuff. Yeah, Sabrina Greek, just like how Zack Snyder needs an editor. Yeah, he definitely does. Zack Snyder should never be given final cut. In fact, Zack Snyder should just be a cinematographer. That's that because he has a good eye and he can frame a good shot, right? And a lot of his movies, at least with certain shots sort of viewed out of context, like he can make a movie that at least looks good in certain ways. But as a storyteller, no. He would be, I think his calling, he was meant to be a cinematographer. Um, 2 to 5 AD says, so the way I think I'd play it is everyone suspects he's bluffing, but not Trump surrenders anyway because he's just such a coward. Would that work? Oh, sure. I mean, if you can get that across, yeah. I think not portraying the Trump surrogate as a coward is definitely a good way to go for sure. Um, Yeah, Philip, I noticed that the first time I saw it. Yeah, that Snyder's Watchmen has comedian as a 60-year-old man with no superpowers punching through concrete. That's something that, again, it's one of those Snyder things. Like everything is so amped up, it's just drenched in testosterone. So even the characters that don't have superpowers, which is everybody except Doctor Manhattan, are still treated as though they have superpowers. So yeah, that for the big fight at the beginning between the comedian and his killer. I won't spoil it in case you've never seen or read Watchmen, but the character who has arrived to kill him, uh, yeah, they're doing superhero stuff. They're like it's like they have super strength, or super invulnerability because they're being having their heads smashed through marble tables and getting back up and still fighting and um, you know and one of the uh, key points in the original Watchmen comic is Doctor Manhattan, and this survives to the movie too, but the point is blunted somewhat by everything else. One of the points in the comic is that Doctor Manhattan showed up and changed everything because he was the only one with superpowers. Nobody else had superpowers. It was just Dr. Manhattan. So when he shows up, it's this thing that nobody's ever seen before, and he changes the world. Uh, so the other Watchmen, the other masked uh, vigilantes are just that. They're vigilantes. Like they don't have superpowers, and technically they don't have superpowers in Zack Snyder's Watchmen either, but they kind of do, because of the things that they do. Kane 20C, smooth jazz, maybe a little, maybe for background music. Um, I mean, I do, as you know from listening to the Ensign's log, I do prefer Rigelian blues. Um, Joe McClory asks, "Are you going to do any best superhero evers for anyone other than bats and soups?" I mean, never say never, but I don't have plans right now to do any. I mean, I kind of have to do the Batman and Superman ones just in between stuff as I have time as it is. So if I added even more and said like I'm going to do one about Spider-Man and one about Wonder Woman and other that's even more. That well, I guess I'll just do 4 of these a year. You know what I mean? Like it's tough to fit the ones that I'm doing into the schedule. So at the moment, you know, no plans. Um, Dana, the fact that talk about unionizing began over a game of D&D doesn't make me see good in D&D. I mean, I'm glad that the unionizing talk happened, but it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't. I'll tell you this: it doesn't make me any more interested in wanting to play D&D or watch other people play D&D or hear people talk about D&D or RPGs in general. It doesn't change my opinion of the actual thing. But the fact that one of those sessions led to something positive like that, I think that's terrific. But it still doesn't remotely interest me. 255 AD. Yes, there's a spoiler only for people who know their who know their history and know their you know. Anyway, I feel like if I said more, that would also be a spoiler. Why? I don't even know why I'm worried about spoiling Watchmen anyway. But whatever. Kemp Chalmers with a super chat. Kenny G Christmas special? I probably wouldn't watch it. John Burns says, so a documentary called It's a Snyder Thing wouldn't be a good idea, or a mockumentary called It's a Snyder Thing wouldn't be a good idea. I mean, it depends on which direction it went, I guess. Kane 20C, favorite non-DC or Marvel comic publisher? IDW, because they do the Star Trek stuff. And the Star Trek stuff from IDW has, for the most part, been very good. Matthew, do we have any examples of Rigelian blues? No. I do not. I do not. And I don't know if Jason does either. I would guess that Jason does not either. Brad, I like that. Snide, the Zack Snyder story. I can get behind that. I can get behind that. I do love a good pun. Yeah, Kane, they did IDW did I don't know what other Transformers comics they've done, but I know they did a Transformers Star Trek crossover that was drawn in the style of Star Trek the animated series that I enjoyed quite a bit. That was a lot of fun. I mean, it was Star Trek the animated series and the Transformers, the original Transformers animated series. Like that was the art style. So it read like specifically a crossover of those two versions of Transformers and Star Trek, and I liked it a lot. No, Geek, I've seen bits and pieces of Beast Wars, but I've never watched a lot of it, and it's not something I got into. I was a Transformers fan. Oh, hi, homebody. Glad you could stop by. I was a Transformers fan in the 80s when the original cartoon was on and the first wave of toys came out. And that was when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. And then I didn't really follow it after that. Like I've never seen any of the later stuff. I've never seen Beast Wars or any of the more recent incarnations of the show. I kind of stopped following it after that. Exactly, CMAC, and it is Rigelian blues, by the way. I don't really care for Rigelian jazz. It's like, you know. It's Rigel. I mean, I don't want to say Rigelian jazz is like bad because it's like culturally insensitive. Like, oh, Rigelians don't know how to play jazz, right? But it's like, you know, but Rigelian blues right there. Oh, love it. Rigelian jazz, and there, believe me, if you've heard both, you can tell the difference right away. Radical Bacon, would I join a YouTubers union? Well, sure. If it was like financially feasible for me, if the dues weren't more than I could safely afford, and if I felt like, you know, it was worth it. I mean, I wouldn't join a YouTubers union if it seemed like it was just like something that was going to wind up being like a jack off thing and wouldn't actually be able to accomplish anything. But if it was like a serious thing, Yeah, sure. I would love to join a YouTubers union. Um, Steve Smalling says, I always felt Ducat is what Khan could have been if he had been in more episodes. Your thoughts? Yeah, sure. I there are similarities there for sure. Um, the megalomania, the you know feeling that they're smarter than the people they're fighting or opposed to or whatever. Yeah, I think there are similarities between Ducat and Khan for sure. Ambition, dreams of conquest, etc. Matthew asks, is Rigelian jazz anything like Star Wars jizz? I think maybe that's why I don't like it. It's a lot like Star Wars jizz. Yeah. Um, and now people just talking about fucking D&D shit in the chat of my live stream. The disrespect, the 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 flagrant disrespect. Uh Steve Schmilly, don't forget the self-righteousness. Yeah. Yeah, there's self-righteousness too, for sure. Yeah, Radical Bacon. I remember that one. Yeah, and I was interested in it when it first was sort of floated, but it didn't seem like a serious thing. It didn't seem like something that would ever be able to accomplish anything. Well, Daryl, to be fair to yourself, Dana, I have no idea what a bard is, and I don't care. Anyway, Rigelian jazz will not actually be discovered until humanity achieves warp drive capability and begins to explore the galaxy. So, I mean, nobody at this point on planet Earth, nobody has heard Rigelian jazz or Rigelian blues, the superior genre, in my opinion. So don't beat yourself up over having not heard of it. Nobody on this planet has heard of it. Yannick Muller says, have you ever read the original Spider-Man issues? They are so goofy in his first appearance. The Green Goblin tricks Spidey by convincing him to shoot a movie with him. They are, I haven't read them for a long time. I read them back in my early 20s. And the original Spider-Man comics, like the original Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and then after Ditko left, John Romita, they're some of my favorite superhero comics ever. And yes, they are very goofy, very silly, but they're some of my favorite superhero comics ever. I love them so much. So yes, I have read them for sure. John Burns, Marjorie Taylor Greene's student loans. Well, see. I don't. Her loans, the loans she got forgiven were PPP loans, which were given out to small business owners during the pandemic or during the beginning of the pandemic, and she had those forgiven. And I mean, and the thing is, a lot of people who got PPP loans had them forgiven, which is fine. I have no problem with Marjorie Taylor Greene having her loans forgiven. I have no problem with anybody having their loans forgiven. What I have a problem with is her having her loans forgiven, and her loans that she had forgiven were in the area of $183,000 worth of loans that she had forgiven. And she is now turning around and saying, and a bunch of other Republicans with similar experiences who have had loans forgiven, and in some cases in incredibly vast amounts, turning around and saying that it's a terrible idea to forgive $10,000 or $20,000 of student loans for people. So it's okay when you get your $180,000 loan forgiven. Well, that's okay. That's good. I mean, she took the money, right? So she didn't say, "Oh no, it's not fair. I should have to pay this back." She accepted the forgiveness, right? So it's okay for her and for all the other people who are now complaining. But for someone who's paying off their college debt, to get $10,000, $10,000 of debt relief, not 180,000, but just 10,000. That's not fair. That's not fair for the government to do that. That's wrong. Even though it's government-backed student loans. So they owe the money to the government. And the government saying, you don't have to pay this back. So it doesn't hurt anybody. It's not even like, you can't even say like, oh, what about the poor private? What about the mom and pop banks that are missing out on all this revenue because all the loans have been free? That's not happening. It's government-backed loans. So it's the government saying, you don't have to pay this back. It doesn't hurt anybody. It doesn't hurt anybody. But it's not fair. It's not fair. Yeah. Dana, I know what a bard is. It's like a poet or whatever. I know what a bard is. I just don't know what the D&D version of it is. And I don't care. You don't have to tell me. Kemp Chalmers asks, what's the graphic on my shirt? I mentioned it earlier. Radical Bacon noticed it right before I started answering the patron questions. But this is a CM Punk t-shirt. So it is a logo relating to CM Punk based on the Chicago city flag. CM Punk is from Chicago. Chicago is kind of his whole thing. So it's an interpretation of the Chicago city flag with blue stripes instead of red. And then Punk's emblem of the crossed taped fists in front of the Chicago flag. And then it also says best in the world, which is what Punk calls himself. So it's a CM Punk t-shirt. Kane 20C, just don't. Yeah, John Conn was in more than one episode. Yeah. Well, yeah, because he was in one episode and then he was in Star Trek 2. So he was in an episode and a movie. So I wouldn't count Khan as a one-off. And actually he was in three movies. He was in three because the Kelvinverse version of Khan was also in Star Trek Into Darkness. So Khan is not a one-off villain, but I think Gul Madred is, or at least is close enough that I can claim him as my favorite. Yeah, Radical Bacon. Well, Radical Bacon, exactly. Mom and Pop Bank. Exactly. There's no such thing. Yeah, some random geek is right about that, Joe. Yeah. If Dana tried to do some D&D thing after Hilda for Trek Reluctantly, I would veto that so fast. Listen, she's already tried. She wanted us to do like a math textbook for a read-away. Like, that's not, what? That's, I mean, that's just not going to happen. That's just ridiculous. So, I didn't do that. I said no to that. And yes, if the pitch was after Hilda, let's watch some D&D based bullshit. No, that's okay. No, we're not doing that. Matthew, I don't have anything against it. I think math is great. I just don't like trying to learn it. I mean, I have nothing against math. I have something against being a math student because I suck at it. And it's no fun for me. And it's just not remotely what I'm interested in doing. But no, nothing against math at all. Of course not. Michael Handeline says, I don't remember if I asked before, but are you into old noir stuff at all? I kind of discovered it during the pandemic. The Big Sleep is my fave. Yeah, I am a little. I don't claim to be like a massive aficionado of film noir, but yeah, The Big Sleep is good. Maltese Falcon. The Third Man is, we've done The Third Man on late seating. The Third Man is one of my favorite movies. Out of the Past. Oh, God damn. Out of the Past. I don't think we've done Out of the Past on late seating. I don't think we have, but we should, because Out of the Past is a masterpiece. I mean, Robert Mitchum, come on, man. Um, yeah, I do love me. I do love me some film noir for sure. Steve Smalling says, would you do a phone book read away in the style of a D&D bard? Since I have no idea what the style of a D&D bard is, nor do I have any desire to learn, nor do I have any desire to do anything remotely related to D&D, no, I would not. Yeah, Michael, Third Man is amazing. Oh, so good. Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton together again. Oh, goddamn. Orson Welles as Harry Lime, one of my favorite performances. One of my favorite Orson Welles performances for sure. So good. Um, John Burns, I told you that Doogie Howser story in confidence, and I would really rather you not share that in public. Oh, Joe, that is a good idea. That is a good idea. Do a late seating about Gaslight, but then do a summary of another movie. Oh, that's such a funny idea. Oh, oh, that's such a good idea. God damn it. Um, oh, Touch of Evil. That's another good one. See, I like Touch of Evil. You said you hated it, but I really like Touch of Evil. Um, yeah, yeah. Anyway, it's just about 8 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap this up. Y'all can just get together in private and talk about D&D some more if you want, but I'm gonna shut it down for now. But anyway, thank you all so much for joining me once again. Don't forget the charity links, charitylinks.page. I know Geek was posting links to stuff in the chat earlier. Please take note of those, and if you can possibly help out any of our friends who need a helping hand, do so. They would appreciate it, and I would appreciate it as well. Don't forget, if you enjoy the work I do here on YouTube and you want to support me in continuing that work, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives. Become a channel member by clicking the join button. Or you can also make a one-time gift via PayPal or Venmo or a super chat or the thanks button after the stream is over, and do it that way. That'd be great. If you become a patron or a channel member, one of the benefits to supporting in those two ways specifically is you can submit questions ahead of time for Ask Away that I answer in the first part of the show. So thanks to all of my patrons and all of my members and everybody who supports my work in whatever way. I couldn't do it without you. If you are not currently a supporter, but you enjoy my YouTube work and you can afford it, I would urge you to become a patron or a member, because that's what allows me to continue to do it. So thanks to everybody for being a supporter, or for those of you who are thinking about becoming a supporter, thank you for your potential support. Thank you for your super chat just now, John Burns. Philip Marlowe completed a novel by Robert B. Parker, Poodle Springs. Seen it? I have not. Okay. Also, don't forget, in addition to the YouTube stuff, I am on a couple of podcasts, part of the Lemmy Listen family of podcasts. There is Late Seating, the movie review podcast with myself and Jason Harding, and there is the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast with myself and Jason Harding and Dana Cole. So check out those and at the links in the description. And specifically, if you watch my channel and you are mostly here for the Star Trek stuff, I really think you'll dig the Ensign's log. So check it out. There will be no Saturday 6 from Dana this week, as Dana just mentioned in the chat. Dana has plans tomorrow, so there will be no Saturday 6. Usually this is the time where I would say, don't forget to go over to Dana's channel tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern for the Saturday 6, but there won't be one, so don't do that. You'll just be sitting there waiting on nothing. And I'd like to save you that inconvenience. So anyway, I will see you all next week for a bunch of new videos. I will see you on Wednesday back here with me and Dana to watch another episode of Deep Space Nine for Trek Reluctantly. And I'll have videos up on various subjects between now and then as well. So have a good night. Have a good weekend. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for asking questions. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thanks for everything. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.